The British Empire governed more territory than any power before it, yet its greatest confidence did not come at the height of expansion. It came later, when expansion slowed, borders stabilized, and control felt routine. The contradiction is subtle but decisive. Empires expect danger at the frontier, not at the center. They expect collapse to announce itself through rebellion, invasion, or visible disorder. What the British Empire trusted instead was the quiet, the assumption that silence meant consent, that endurance meant permanence, that systems which had worked yesterday would continue working tomorrow without alteration. Control, once established, was treated not as a condition to be maintained, but as a fact of the world. By the early 20th century, Britain presided over an architecture of authority that stretched across oceans and continents. Governors ruled in distant capitals. Administrators produced reports in consistent language. Trade flowed through ports whose names repeated across maps colored in imperial red. Railways cut through landscapes previously governed by local rhythms. Telegraph lines compressed distance into hours, then minutes. Law codes standardized behavior. Census categories fixed identity into legible forms. On paper, the empire was coherent. Its mechanisms functioned with precision. Orders moved outward. Information moved inward. The system appeared responsive, adaptive, and rational. What was observed were outputs: tax revenue, troop movements, shipping volumes, election results, and managed assemblies. What was not observed were the absences accumulating between these signals. Control was exercised less through spectacle than through repetition. Ritualized authority became ordinary authority. The governor's residence, the courthouse, the parade ground, the administrative office, these were not symbols meant to inspire awe so much as environments meant to normalize obedience. Over time, power ceased to feel imposed and began to feel infrastructural. It was embedded in schedules, permits, forms, and procedures. Decisions were distributed across layers of administration, each insulated by protocol. Responsibility diffused, authority hardened into process. This was not chaos. It was order refined to the point where friction became invisible. As the empire matured, belief in its own manageability deepened. Britain did not see itself as ruling through force alone, but through competence. The language of stewardship replaced the language of conquest. Stability became evidence of legitimacy. The absence of open revolt was read as confirmation that governance had succeeded. Each territory was treated as a problem already solved, requiring only maintenance. When unrest appeared, it was categorized as local disturbance rather than systemic strain. The assumption was that control, once achieved, did not reverse. It merely required calibration. Yet authority alters the way information behaves. Reports are shaped by expectation. Signals are filtered by relevance. What does not fit the framework is delayed, softened, or rephrased. Administrators learned what kinds of concerns traveled upward and which dissolved before reaching London. Economic productivity traveled easily. Security threats, if clearly defined, traveled quickly. But erosion, slow shifts in legitimacy, meaning, and consent had no clear category. They produced no single event, no decisive metric. They accumulated instead as residue. The empire's confidence rested not only on institutions, but on precedent. Britain had weathered crises before. Rebellions had been suppressed. Territories lost in one decade were compensated by gains in another. Control had bent, but not broken. This history of survival shaped expectation. The system learned from past shocks how to absorb future ones. What it did not learn was how to recognize conditions that no longer resembled earlier crises. Patterns repeated, but context changed. The empire continued to respond to pressure as if the same levers still reached the same outcomes. Power also reshapes time. Urgency diminishes when authority feels secure. Decisions stretch across years, then decades. Reforms are postponed because the present appears stable enough to allow delay. Promises are extended into an indefinite future. The empire's long memory became a liability. It encouraged patience where adaptation was required. Control was measured not by responsiveness, but by endurance. The ability to wait became confused with the ability to govern. Across colonies, administrative language remained calm, even as conditions shifted beneath it. Nationalist movements were described as transient. Economic extraction was justified as development. Political participation was expanded slowly, then paused, then recalibrated. Each adjustment was framed as prudent restraint. The system valued gradualism, believing that change introduced too quickly would destabilize order. Yet gradualism assumes that authority sets the pace. It assumes the environment will wait. As global conditions shifted, industrialization elsewhere, war, ideological realignment, the empire's structures began to experience strain that did not register as immediate threat. World wars mobilized resources and loyalty, but they also exposed contradictions. Subjects asked what their participation meant. Sacrifice generated expectation. Control persisted, but coherence weakened. Authority still issued commands, but their justification grew thinner. The empire responded by reaffirming procedure, leaning harder on the mechanisms that had once ensured stability. Belief in control does not announce itself as arrogance. It presents as professionalism, as experience, as a sense that complexity has been mastered through repetition. British governance prized moderation, balance, and continuity. These traits were not illusions. They had real effects, but they also narrowed perception. When authority becomes accustomed to being obeyed, it stops asking why obedience persists. It treats compliance as neutral rather than contingent. The system's greatest strength, its administrative depth, became its blind spot. Layers of governance insulated decision-makers from direct contact with consequence. Feedback loops lengthened. By the time discontent surfaced clearly, it had already reorganized itself into movements, identities, and demands that no longer fit within imperial frameworks. Control mechanisms still functioned, but they addressed a world that no longer existed. Decolonization is often narrated as a series of decisions, conferences, and withdrawals. But the deeper pattern is one of delayed recognition. Britain did not suddenly lose control. It continued to administer, negotiate, and manage, even as its authority drained of meaning. The empire's belief was not that collapse was impossible, but that it would be orderly, supervised, and contained. That control would persist even in retreat. Power rarely confronts its limits directly. It encounters them indirectly through inefficiency, contradiction, and fatigue. The British Empire encountered these limits not at the moment of loss, but earlier, when it mistook endurance for consent, when it believed that because the system still operated, it was still believed in. Authority remained visible. Legitimacy did not. What eroded was not the machinery of rule, but the shared assumption that the machinery represented something necessary or inevitable. Control without belief becomes management without loyalty. It can persist for a time, it can adapt superficially, but it no longer organizes meaning. The empire continued to issue directives, but fewer people experienced those directives as binding in the same way. At a certain point, authority begins to govern itself rather than its subjects. Procedures exist to justify other procedures. Stability is measured internally rather than externally. The system becomes self-referential. This is not decay in the dramatic sense. It is erosion, quiet, cumulative, and difficult to reverse. The inward turn arrives when power senses resistance, but cannot locate its source. Is the problem communication, policy, or personnel? Adjustments are made, committees formed, reports commissioned. Each response reinforces the belief that control remains intact because it is still being exercised. The question that does not surface is whether control is still recognized as legitimate at all. What the British Empire confronted was not simply opposition, but a shift in how authority was understood. Control that once felt stabilizing began to feel extractive. Order that once promised continuity began to signal stagnation. The empire did not lack intelligence or capacity. It lacked the ability to perceive when those capacities no longer produced the same effects. The uncomfortable question lingers beneath the pattern. At what point does believing in control become the force that prevents its renewal? When does confidence harden into inertia? Power depends not only on the ability to act, but on the ability to recognize when action no longer carries the same meaning. In its final phases, the empire often appeared most composed. Withdrawals were negotiated, institutions transferred, flags lowered with ceremony. Control remained visible until the end. What was absent was the earlier conviction that this control defined the future rather than managed its exit. The pattern does not belong to Britain alone. It belongs to authority, wherever it mistakes coherence for legitimacy and endurance for consent. Power sustains itself by reading the world correctly. When it begins to read only itself, the signals it trusts are already too late. If this made you pause, subscribe to Timeless Questions for more reflections on history and human nature.